Hello, Profit Hackers. I'm Jeremy Lott, the Chief Visionary for Foundation Accounting and Consulting. I owned a construction company for about 15 years before making a change to accounting because my accountants sucked. My goals are to simplify accounting for construction company owners, fuel your profits, level up your cash flow, and help you grow in a financially responsible way. So let's go. Hey, Profit Hackers. Welcome to the Contractors Profit Hack Show. This is Jeremy Lott. And again, we're going to talk a little bit during this episode about how to better manage your cash flow. And one of the best ways to do that is by having policies in place that tell your team how things are supposed to be handled at different points in time, right? So recently we've covered the accounts payable and cash disbursements policy and why it's important to have that in place to protect how the cash goes out of your business, right? Today, we're going to talk about the accounts receivable and cash receipts policy and protecting how that money comes into the business and making sure that that money does come into the business. I can't remember if I mentioned here before or not. I'm very open about this, but I have problems with depression. And there were many years where I could barely get things done. I have several days where getting out of bed was my biggest success, and some days where I didn't even accomplish that. It's really hard to run a company and make a living when that's the case, especially when you're all by yourself. So I've had a lot of ups and downs over the years. A few years ago, I started working with a therapist that helped me understand myself better and helped teach me tools to be able to avoid those problems. So the first tool that she taught me was to make a list. You got to make a list. You got to empty your brain, get all the things that you need to do out on a piece of paper, right? That way it's not bogging down your brain function. So that's the first thing that you need to work on is getting everything down on a list, right? Step number 2 is to take the first thing on that list and break it down to its smallest possible steps, right? So I'll use getting out of bed as an example. You don't have to wake up in the morning and get out of bed. What you have to do is you have to wake up. You have to then pull the blankets back. Then you have to sit up. Then you have to swing your legs over the edge of the bed. Then you stand up, and now you're out of bed, right? Those are all the little teeny steps. And what ends up happening is that you do the very first smallest step, and then maybe you have to think about the second one. But as you start doing those little teeny steps, it builds up momentum. And you start to be able to do more and more and more, and things really start clicking and working for you, right? So that was what my therapist taught me on how to be able to be productive and to get things done, right? And in implementing that, I was able to build up foundation and hire people. And now we have a smooth, well-running machine that makes money. And it's all because of that very, very beginning thing. You have to feed that momentum, right? You have to feed it with teeny little steps that build up that momentum and get you really going, right? So cash is the same way. You have to have a written process that needs to be followed by everybody in the company. And as they follow this process, the cash starts to come in more fluidly, right? you have to have in place all of these different steps for how you are invoicing people and how you are collecting and how it's getting deposited. And through that whole process, as you get things in place, what ends up happening is that your team starts following the process. And as they're following the process, they are then able to start picking up momentum with the cash coming in, right? They don't have to think about when reminder emails go out. They don't have to think about when texts go out. They don't have to think about phone calls or the personal visits to the office. They don't have to think about any of those kind of things because it's already built out, and all they have to do is start with step number 1, and steps number 2 through whatever tend to fall in place for you, right? And so some things that you want to include when you're creating an accounts receivable and cash receipts policy are, number 1, your contracts and terms. You got to have a good contract in place. Look, contracts are super important, and I'll tell you why. Here, if you go to meet with somebody, a customer, right? And you come into the conversation and you're thinking A, but the customer's thinking B, right? There's difference there. You know, you're thinking A, they're thinking B. So you talk and you do work on the sales pitch and they agree to the job, but what you both agree on is C, right? Well, you leave that meeting, and if you don't write it down and document it all, even though you're both honest, good people, you're going to come away from that meeting with you still thinking A and the customer still thinking B, and C has been completely forgotten. So contracts are an important way to communicate what's agreed on by both parties, right? Obviously, there are a lot of loopholes if you're a dishonest person. So contracts tend to apply mainly to honest people, and it's a form of communicating what is happening and what needs to happen, right? So contracts are super important to have. And along with those contracts are terms when you're going to collect on those different debts, right? And we talked about the importance of terms a little bit in the previous episode. Those things still apply here, but instead of negotiating terms with your vendors and your suppliers, here we're negotiating terms with the people that are going to be paying us, right? And explaining to them when we expect to get paid. The next thing that you want a good policy on is your progressive billing and invoicing process, right? How much do you invoice them up front? Do you bill them during the process at different landmarks? How much do you end up billing at the end? And who it is that is creating those invoices and when, who's dictating what goes on those invoices, and where the invoice is getting recorded. Again, a lot of people have a job costing software, Buildertrend, ServiceTitan, those kind of things. And QuickBooks Online, is the invoice being created in the job costing software and then imported into QuickBooks Online, or is the opposite what's going on, right? So you want to have a written policy that says where it's being recorded and who's doing it and how much they're doing it for, right? What your policy is as far as progressive billing and invoicing. The next thing that you want a policy on is deposits and advance payments, right? So when you receive money from the client, according to GAAP, which is the generally accepted accounting principles, you haven't earned that money yet because you haven't done anything. So technically, according to the IRS and according to generally accepted accounting principles, that is not income yet, right? Now, there are a bunch of different rules and ins and outs for that. We're not going to get into those, but basically, you need to make sure that when you receive a deposit or an advance payment, that it's being recorded properly and credited properly to that person's account and to your financials so that it's showing correctly on the financials, right? Next is the change orders. You need to make sure that you have an agreement in place with your customer that absolutely no work will be done without a new estimate on the changes. That includes the change in time and the change in the timeline, right? The change in the timeline for getting the work done and the change in price. And they have to sign them, every one of them, right? It's another contract. It's another one of those scenarios where you come in thinking A, they're thinking B, and through this change order, you're creating C. And when they sign it and you sign it, everybody knows that C exists and that's what we're abiding by, right? So change orders are super important. It's one of the quickest ways to lose money on a job. Don't do work for free. Stay in scope. Get your change orders before doing the work, the change, right? Next, you want to make sure that you have lien releases and that you are maintaining your mechanics lien rights, right? So if you're employing subcontractors, you want to make sure that you have a policy in place for when they are to give you a lien release. And you want to make sure that you are maintaining your mechanics lien rights, which we talked about already in the previous episode. So I'm not going to go into detail on that here. The next is the collections and past due accounts. When do you send out reminders? Who is sending them out? Whether it's by email, text, phone call, or in person, right? You need to make sure that you set out the standards for what happens when on how to collect things. If you don't have a standard in place and you aren't collecting according to a schedule, then your collection is going to decrease dramatically, right? It's been proven time and again that people that have a written policy for this on collections collect a higher percentage of their debt, of their income due to them than other companies. Okay. So you want to make sure that you have that written down. You want to make sure that you are pulling up the accounts receivable aging report frequently to make sure that it is correct and so that you can follow up with your team and know where you are at in the collection process with all those different customers that you've invoiced. Okay, so that's super important to have written down that process and how you're going to handle that. Okay. Next, segregation of duties. Again, you want a different person opening the checks and depositing the checks, if at all possible, right? If it's not possible, then you're going to have to build in some more detailed audit processes on that, right? To make sure that you know what's being received and that you know what's being deposited so that there's not a difference there, okay? Again, so money doesn't grow legs and walk away. And then we already talked a little bit about internal audits and controls. And for that, we need to make sure that we have a policy in place to regularly review the whole process, make sure it's being followed, and make sure the reporting is accurate to what actually happens in the bank account and with your different customer accounts, right? So that pretty much covers the accounts receivable and cash receipts policy. Those are some important things to think about when you're putting this together. Again, ChatGPT can be your best friend for putting this together. You can also hire someone like myself and my team to help you put this together, or someone completely different, right? This doesn't have to be something that you sit down and write out, okay? Another good suggestion is, if you do want more control over it, then do a voice memo and upload it to ChatGPT to transcribe, right? That way you can just be driving or whatever, and you can talk about how you want things to happen. And then a process can be created based on your voice memo. Okay, so that's another option for that. That covers our two different important policies: the accounts payable and cash disbursements, and the accounts receivable and cash receipts policies, right? These are super important to have in place so that there's good communication with your team on how your money is supposed to be handled, who is handling it, what your strategy is as far as when to pay and how to collect, all of those kind of details, right? So that's very important to have. Make sure that you get that done and you have something in place, and you do a training with your team so everybody knows how things are supposed to operate there, okay? So this is Jeremy with Foundation Accounting and Consulting. And thank you for listening to this episode of the Contractors Profit Hack Show. I will talk to you later. Thanks for listening. If you found this episode helpful, please like and subscribe for weekly episodes to help you fuel your profit, level up your cash flow, and finance your growth. Until next time, go enjoy some green M&Ms and protect that cash.